I came very close to googling whether I'd made the right choices in Pentiment. I absolutely hated not knowing, but I also knew that googling it would ruin exactly what the game was so successfully doing to me, making me feel as uncomfortable as the protagonist. Pentiment had been on my mind for weeks, and after watching several heads roll, I finally got to see the credits roll as well. By that point, the game had accomplished its mission with flying colors. It managed to make me identify with a hand-drawn protagonist, Andreas Mahler, who looks like he could have stepped straight out of an old book. His worries became my worries, because Pentiment made me feel uneasy for weeks, constantly wondering whether I was doing the right thing. One question in particular kept coming back. Did I just send an innocent man to his grave? Looking back, the beginning of Pentiment feels like a distant memory. That's partly because of how cleverly Obsidian structures the game. You experience decades passing by. Children grow up, people fall in love, grow old, get sick and die. Some flourish, others become bitter because of the events you witness and sometimes directly influence. So it feels like an eternity ago that I first arrived in Tassing as Andreas. Back then, the little town was still an unpainted canvas. Secrets were carefully buried. Future lovers hadn't even met yet, and people I now know will eventually die were still in the prime of their lives. And I started my story full of optimism. Pentiment introduced me to the eccentric Baron Lorenz Rothvogel. There were so many mysteries and rumors surrounding this man that I was convinced he was going to play a major role in my story. Not much later, I found him dead. So much for that prediction. Instead, it was up to me to figure out what happened. And that's when Pentiment started messing with my head. I was giving several leads and then left to my own devices. After following the first lead, getting caught up in a conversation and watching an entire part of the day disappear, I started to feel uneasy. Apparently, there was a deadline. Archdeacon Jacob Essler was on his way, and by the time he arrived, he needed to know what happened. Meanwhile, time kept slipping away while my numbers of leads only grew. The more people I talked to, the more secrets I uncovered. The quest log pointed me in certain directions, but talking to people who weren't even mentioned there could suddenly reveal entirely new leads. So which ones do you then choose to pursue? Personally, I tended to follow the leads I discovered myself. I hoped I'd be rewarded for investigating something on my own initiative. But I couldn't investigate everything. Eventually, I started building a case against Ferenc. Is that how we pronounce his name? I guess so, we never hear it, so let's just hope that's it. I discovered that Lawrence had been blackmailing him. Ferenc had apparently been studying occult rituals, and Lawrence could expose him. A possible motive for Ferenc to put a stop to that. Possible. That word became pretty important. Because when the Archdeacon finally arrived, I still had no hard evidence. What I did have was a collection of exposed secrets, possible motives and suspicious behavior, but nothing that really proved murder. And there was no dialogue option that could get me out of this. I had to point the finger at someone. So I didn't choose an undisputed killer. I chose the most likely suspect, Ferenc. And less than a minute later, the poor guy was being prepared for execution right in front of me. Pentiment had been merciless enough to force my hand, but it was generous enough to at least give me the option to look away. But I politely declined. I, Andreas Mahler, was personally responsible for the death of this possible murderer, and I was going to see it through to the bitter end. And at that point, I genuinely thought Pentiment was almost over. I waited for the credits because I desperately wanted one answer. Had I been right? And if I hadn't, fine, I'd just reload an earlier save and make things right. But Pentiment had other plans. Instead of the credits, Act 2 suddenly disappeared on screen. Shit. 7 years passed, Andreas was older, he had an apprentice named Casper now, and I still had absolutely no idea whether Ferenc had actually murdered Lawrence 7 years before. Pentiment wasn't going to make me live with that uncertainty for a couple of minutes. It was making Andreas live with it for years. And then it did the whole thing again. Otto was murdered, which actually hurt. 7 years earlier, Otto had helped me during my investigation into Lawrence's murder. I liked the guy. But at least by now I had some experience solving murder cases, or at least I thought I did. Once again I was chasing leads against the clock, and once again the people I investigated turned out to be hiding some pretty serious things. By talking to people the game never specifically pointed me towards, I discovered that Martin wasn't actually Martin. The man calling himself Martin had assumed the identity of the real Martin, whom I'd met as a young boy 7 years earlier. Obviously, something there smelled fishy, but was it the smell of murder? Then there was brother Guy. Guy had irritated me pretty much straight from the beginning, and now I discovered he had been manipulating the Abbey's financial records and stealing money. So once again, I wasn't choosing between innocent people and an obvious murderer. I was choosing between people who had done suspicious things that weren't necessarily related to the murder I was actually investigating. And this is where my own reasoning started getting questionable. As much as I would have liked to see Guy lose his head, messing around with numbers and money seemed less closely related to murder than taking over someone else's identity and deceiving an entire village for years. If you're capable of that, surely you're also capable of murder. Hell, maybe Martin had already done exactly that by getting rid of the real Martin all those years ago. Those were the actual thoughts that were going through my head. And that's how I ended up accusing Martin. Another man fell victim to my half-baked investigation. And while the leads weren't exhausted, I certainly was. Was this the second man I'd wrongly sent to his death? And would I once again have to wait years to find out? Lucky Andreas, he didn't have to carry that question anymore. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. Because at the end of Act 2, the Abbey burns down and Andreas appears to perish with it. But I still had to wrestle with my conscience. Then Pentiment handed control to the new protagonist, Magdalene. Another 18 years had passed, and this is where something about Pentiment really started clicking for me. Tossing remembered. People had grown older, people had died, and the people who were still alive had their own memories of what Andreas had done. And not necessarily the same memories. Agnes, for example, doesn't exactly remember Andreas fondly. She believes he helped start it and escalate the revolt all those years ago. And she had personal reasons to dislike him. Agnes is the mother of the wife of fake Martin, the man who I had accused all those years earlier. Suddenly these weren't just choices sitting forgotten in some dialogue tree. Decades had passed and people were still living with their consequences. And then Pentiment finally gave me answers. Just not the one I'd spent the entire game waiting for. I finally discovered who had been pulling the strings behind everything happening in Tassing, Father Thomas. He had manipulated people from the shadows, using their secrets to push events in a certain direction whenever the history and beliefs of Tassing were threatened. So there it was, an answer. But did Ferenc actually murder Lawrence? Did Martin murder Otto? I still don't know. Pentiment never tells us. And that's when I realized that the uncertainty I'd been carrying around wasn't going anywhere. Maybe I'd sent innocent men to their death. Maybe I'd actually picked the murderers. There was no perfect lead I had failed to pursue. No definitive piece of evidence I could uncover that would finally absolve me of my choices. I'd made them with the information I had, and now I had to live with them. And suddenly that frustration I'd felt throughout the entire game made sense. Pentiment isn't really a traditional detective game. You can't get to the actual bottom of everything, solve the murders and prevent all the suffering. For weeks, Pentiment made me restless because I wanted to find the murderer and put the right suspect behind bars. What I didn't realize was that this was never really the point. Even now, with the credits behind me, I still don't know whether I accused the right people. And apparently, I never will. Because Pentiment isn't really about successfully solving a series of murders. You're merely a passerby in a much longer story. One that isn't about Andreas. It's about Tassing. If you like this little thesis, please do feel free to subscribe, put a thumbs up, or maybe leave a comment. Also, in case you're bored, go to bornformedia.com where you can find articles like this and many more random thoughts, reviews, and all other kinds of nonsense. Hope to see you soon.